All right, another thing, after we talk about fire, we want to talk about soil nutrition. And this is exceptionally important. Reason being, these soils are engineered. These are man-made soils we're putting on these roofs, especially the lightweights, the extensives. Some of the intensives actually are using regular earth. The problem is the building has to be designed to carry such a heavy load that the cost of designing and building the building heavy enough to carry a native soil is much more expensive than buying a lightweight soil, even though lightweight soils are 3 times the expense of native, just using native earth. Okay. So in these lightweight soils, you've got nutrition issues, especially in the extensive and that thin layer roof, because what are we doing? We're basically putting water on this. If we're capturing water, we're conducting it out down the pipe and into the storm system, or we're letting the plants use it. But what's happening is all our water-soluble nutrients, primarily nitrogen, our nitrogens are most water-soluble, that's the nutrient we lose the most. Phosphorus, potash, typically cling and hang around. There's no, you want to get dial down in your soil science. These things don't have a good cation exchange capacity, so they don't have a good great ability to buffer nutrients. They don't grab them and hold them as well as native soils, especially because there's no clays, there's no silts and clays. The testing needs to be done on an annual basis. This is a Penn State, and I'm sorry this slide is kind of junky, but Penn State has great soil testing for green roofs, okay? And you can get it online, you can find it online. You want to be testing your soils annually. That's about a $300 test, okay? Actually, you can sort of go a la carte here, and you can spend more than, typically on the tests that I run, and we end up spending about $350, okay? That's the Penn State, but that's going to tell you how to manage your nutrients. The biggest thing we don't want to, biggest issue is we don't want to be going up there and dumping a bunch of excess fertilizer on this roof, because it's going to end up in the storm system. And when it ends up in the storm system, it's going to end up in the river, then it's going to end up in the Gulf of Mexico, and we all know about the problems. So when you're managing a green roof, when you're doing that maintenance, nutrient management is key. And it's not like, act grade landscape where every spring you go and you sing some 10-10-10 around and call it a day. We don't want to over-fertilize, we don't want to under-fertilize, we want to manage the fertilizer. It's a fairly expensive test. The only problem is it takes, about 3 cups of soil. That's not a big issue when you're on a big extensive roof that was a built-up system where you put your soil down, put your mat down. But if you have tray systems, you end up digging holes in your trays. So what do you do after 5 years? You took 3 cups out, you end up with a bunch of holes. It's a little bit of a disconnect on maintenance. You got to be a little careful. You got to pull the stuff up, steal a little bit out from underneath. You got to do that soil test. You want to manage your nutrients effectively. The system we use, we actually use a green roof fertilizer that is we get it from Germany. It's basically a encapsulated, sulfur encapsulated. It's like Osmocote. You can get it from a company called Resource Conservation Technology. They're out of Baltimore. And this stuff we're using has a 3-year window. It'll last for 3 years. I think you were getting probably 2 good years out of it. All right. The other issue you're going to have with your green roof soil mediums is that your micronutrients are going to be potentially out of balance. So when you build a new roof, you should test the soil. We've had situations where, brand new roof, we checked our soil and we had potassium out of balance. So we had fertilizer out of balance, and even down in the micros, and not potassium, not a micronutrient, but gone in, the roof wasn't growing. Gone back, fertilized, bam, the thing came back on us. Okay? So even with a new roof, you're going to want to you're going to want to do some soil testing, unless you are using that particular soil product enough to understand, know the product. All right, after nutrition, and these two are linked, weeding. All right, everybody knows the drill. If you've got a yard, you've got a house, you pull weeds. If you're a landscape contractor, maintenance professional, you're pulling weeds. Guess what you're doing up on a roof? You're pulling weeds. Okay? This is a bigger picture, bigger view of that wild roof I showed you before. That used to be a sedum roof. There is very, very little sedum. They had allium. We don't use allium on our roofs anymore because you can see how it actually took over. So that was an intentional plant. It looks like grass. That's not grass. That's actually onion. And onion is very, very, very aggressive. So if you're putting onion in your mix, you're very likely going to end up with a roof full of onion. And the other, everything else that was up there sort of blew in. And this thing had thistles and goldenrods and all sorts of stuff. Now, is that a problem? Does it hurt the roof? Does it change the way it works? No, absolutely not. That roof functions the same way it did when it was a sedum roof. It's still trapping rainwater. It's still trans-evaporating water out of the soils. The problem is, it's ugly. It's an aesthetic issue. We've actually, and I showed you the wildflower, we've actually gone up and just put wildflower seed on a roof and turned it into meadow. Okay? Now, we had species in there that were pretty, a bunch of onion and goldenrod. Now, that was a very early, that's a very, very early, that's probably a March photograph, so that hadn't re-greened. But that roof is still working. It's not affecting the performance of that roof. It's just the aesthetic. Now, here's another example of a roof, excuse me, where this slide's not great, but that's clover. You got thistle and clover. These are sort of the two arch enemies of your green roof. Thistle, clover, sometimes they'll get a little nutsedge, not likely. It's mostly too dry for nutsedge, but you will see a lot of clover getting into these roofs. Now, this roof is one that we built, and I've actually been sort of stress testing this thing because it was a demonstration roof. It has no irrigation, and I'll let it go dry. And I put a very diverse plant colony on this thing, and we've been watching it over the years to see who's living and who's dying. It's sort of surprising who's making it and who's not up here. But sorry, excuse me. The biggest problem with any green roof is weeds and weeding. So if you're a contractor and you're trying to, bid, they always ask you for bid. How do you price a green roof job? Well, if you go to a roof that looks like that, with a bunch of weeds on it, guess what? They're not going away on their own. You're going to have to fight them out. So if you go to a roof that's new and clean, it's much easier to keep it clean. Like this roof that went wild, this roof is total. As far as putting it back to a sedum roof, you can't. You're going to essentially have to kill everything up there, excavate it off, take 2 inches of that soil, get it off the roof because it's all contaminated with rhizomes, seed. There's a weed seed load in here now that's going to just keep coming back. And the funny thing about weeds and seed, they don't all germinate at the same time. So if you put 100 goldenrod seeds down, just for instance, they're going to germinate now, next spring, next year, 2 years from now. Plant's genetically programmed to space out its seed germination for survival. Same thing's going to happen to you up here. You can't just break that off and expect it to be clean. It's not going to. There's going to be the weed seed load. Okay, here's a little closer look at, these are clovers. Again, we've got, This actually, believe it or not, there's trefoil in here somehow. We ended up with some trefoil on this job. There's a little bit of nutsedge coming, but it's weeds. And anytime you see these clovers, you're dealing with, they're opportunistic because of low soil nutrition. They're a nitrogen fixator, so they're making their own nitrogen. Like I said, I'm playing with this roof and stressing it and messing around with it a little bit. Really, what's interesting is we're seeing some plants that are, like this is bayberry. Bayberry is awesome on, if you're doing a semi-intensive roof, you need a nice big green shrub. It thrives, it absolutely thrives in the worst conditions, okay? Excuse me. Coneflower is another plant that will handle stresses, but that plant moves around. That'll show up, it's self-seed, so it's going to move all over the place. This was that wildflower roof that we showed you earlier. We replanted it and made it more of a traditional roof. The part where I told you about the weed seed load, these plants, we didn't take any soil off. We essentially took the wildflowers off because we really couldn't get the soil off this thing. We replanted it, we got the Hamlin grass, we got anemones, we have a bunch of black-eyed Susans. So this, you can see where the windows are now, right? These people can look out their windows and see the roof because before that, those plants were this high. But look what happens. All these other guys, there's a goldenrods, this is a coreopsis. Those self-seeded, they were in the soil and came out. So now we're up there pulling these things out. This group's growing great. And it's irrigated, it's got good soil, got good nutrition. It's almost growing too well. You could probably cut back the irrigation because as a manager, you're managing these things. You know, where's the sweet spot? Where am I paying for too much water? Where am I, not paying for enough water? Okay. Again, this is another panel. That's another roof gone wild, right? That's what happens when you let that roof go. It basically turns into a meadow. It's still working. It's still doing what we intended it to do. It doesn't look good. These people that are in these offices are not seeing anything but a big gob of weeds. Now, is it a big gob of weeds or is it a big gob of wildflowers? Right? We're going to talk about that question when we talk about rain gardens, retentive grading areas, because a little bit of this is about how we think, our perceptions. Do we perceive this as okay, or do we want it to look like something else? Do we want to be neat, tidy, clipped, and snipped? All right, we talked about mulch earlier, mulch burns. This is what happens when you got a building, you've got mulch on it, and you've got a windy corner. This is 3-4 years of wind action on this thing. Essentially, it's blown all the mulch off, blown the soil off, to the point where it's essentially dug the drippers out of the ground. Okay? So, what will we do differently here? Should have had an underplanting. Should have had something, whether we were putting sedums up there, whether we were putting, could have been pachysandra. This is an irrigated roof. These are basically a bunch of bayberry. But that is wind